You don't belong here. This is first class. Where are your parents? The flight attendant's voice cut through the quiet hum of the cabin. She loomed over 8-year-old Marcus, who sat calmly in seat 2A. The attendant, Kelly Morrison, had a face flushed with anger, and her sharp tone made every passenger in the premium cabin turn to watch the unfolding scene. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply looked up at her with steady eyes and held out his boarding pass. "This is my seat, ma'am." Kelly snatched the document from his small hand, her fingers crumpling the edge as she scrutinized it, her expression suggesting it was a forgery. "I'm calling security. Children don't fly first class alone." Marcus remained perfectly still, his hands gripping the plush armrests. He was dressed in a neatly pressed shirt and slacks. On the tablet in his lap, a presentation on solar energy glowed, but Kelly's gaze swept past it, ignoring the details. She saw only what she expected to see: a black child in a place she believed he didn't belong. She grabbed the plane's intercom phone. "This is Flight Attendant Morrison. We have a situation in first class, an unaccompanied minor with what appears to be a fraudulent ticket. I need security immediately." Whispers rippled through the cabin as other passengers pulled out their phones. Some shook their heads in disapproval, but no one spoke up. Not yet. Marcus's heart pounded against his ribs, but he held on to the calm his mother had taught him. Kelly hung up the phone and shot him a condescending smirk. "Security will be here in 2 minutes to escort you off this plane. Next time, try flying in a cabin you can actually afford." Marcus looked her straight in the eye, his voice even. "My mother is going to be very upset when she hears about this." Kelly let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, I'm sure Mommy will be very disappointed you tried to sneak into first class." Just then, a new sound sliced through the tension. It was sharp, powerful, and unmistakable. The rhythmic click of expensive heels on the jetway floor, growing closer, louder. Gate agents scurried out of the way. A supervisor froze mid-sentence. Striding toward the aircraft was a tall, powerful black woman in an executive suit that radiated authority. Flanking her were 3 lawyers in sharp attire, the airport director, and 2 visibly terrified airline executives. Her expression was ice cold, but her eyes burned with fire. Kelly, her back to the door, was still gloating over Marcus, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. The heels were just steps away now. Marcus sat up a little straighter, his expression shifting from contained fear to a glimmer of hope. He knew those footsteps. The jetway door swung open, and the woman who had just been informed of everything stepped onto the plane. Kelly had no idea that the force of nature that had just entered was about to dismantle her entire world. Because the woman wasn't just Marcus's mother, she was the most powerful person in the building, and Kelly Morrison had just made the biggest mistake of her career. The fuse for this explosion, however, had been lit 30 minutes earlier at the gate. Marcus Jennings stood in the boarding line at Chicago O'Hare, clutching his ticket as if it were precious. At 8 years old, he was barely tall enough to see over the check-in counter, dressed in his best outfit, which his late grandmother had pressed for him. His backpack, nearly as big as he was filled with presentation materials, research notes, and the prototype of his solar-powered water purification system. Marcus was no ordinary third grader. While his classmates were learning multiplication, Marcus was designing technology with the potential to bring clean water to communities in need. His invention, which used solar panels to power a rapid filtration system, had been called groundbreaking by environmental engineers at Northwestern University. This wasn't a child with a science kit. This was a legitimate inventor. He was flying to Seattle for the National Youth Science Competition, invited as its youngest ever competitor. He was representing his school, his city, and the memory of the people he had lost, his mother to cancer 2 years ago, and the grandmother who raised him until she, too, passed just 3 months back. He was flying alone because he had no one left. But he wasn't afraid. He was determined. He stepped up to the counter and handed his boarding pass to Linda Cooper, a gate agent who had worked for the airline for 12 years. Linda glanced at Marcus, then at the first-class ticket, and her face tightened with suspicion. "Sweetie, this says first class. That can't be right." Marcus stood on his toes. "Yes, ma'am. My mommy bought it for me before she passed." Linda stared at him as if he were speaking another language. "Honey, children don't fly first class, especially not by themselves. Where are your parents?" "My mother purchased this ticket," Marcus said, his voice clear and confident, just as he'd been taught. "I'm flying to Seattle for a science competition. I have all my documents. He presented a folder containing his invitation, school permission forms, unaccompanied minor paperwork, and his mother's authorization letter. Linda barely looked at them. Instead, she picked up her phone. James, I need you at gate 27. We have a situation. She looked down at Marcus with a mixture of pity and distrust. Just wait right here, okay? We need to figure this out. Supervisor James Patterson arrived moments later, a stocky man in his 50s with a permanent scowl burnished by 23 years in the airline industry. He took the boarding pass, inspecting it like a counterfeit bill, then glared down at Marcus. Son, where did you really get this? Did you find it? Marcus met his gaze. No, sir. My mother purchased it. I'm presenting my solar-powered water purification system at the National Youth Science Competition. Patterson exchanged a knowing look with Linda. They didn't believe a word of it. He leaned down, his voice uncomfortably close. Listen, kid. First-class tickets cost a lot of money. This doesn't add up. I'm going to ask you one more time. Where did you get this ticket? Marcus held his ground. My mother bought it. Patterson straightened up. Call security, he told Linda. This ticket could be stolen. The growing line of passengers behind them was becoming restless. Murmurs of suspicion rippled through the crowd. Is that child alone? Someone whispered. Why is he holding up the line? An older man declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. Probably using someone else's miles. Fraud is everywhere these days. A young couple giggled and took a picture of Marcus with their phone, treating him like a spectacle. Marcus heard every word, felt every stare. He stood firm, his dignity a silent rebuke to their prejudice. When airport security arrived, a guard named Derek Mitchell immediately grabbed Marcus's backpack. We need to search this. You can't do that without permission. Marcus's voice rang out clear and strong. I know my rights. You need probable cause, and standing in a boarding line isn't it? Patterson let out a humorless laugh. Listen, kid, who really gave you this ticket? I'm not buying the mother story. Marcus took a deep breath, his grandmother's voice echoing in his memory. Baby, when people don't believe you, you tell them the truth louder. He stood as tall as his small frame would allow. My mother is Dr. Victoria Jennings Rothschild. She is the CEO of Skybridge Airlines. She purchased this ticket for me because I earned it. I am going to Seattle to change the world, and you are trying to stop me because you don't think I belong. For a moment there was silence. Then Patterson and Linda erupted in laughter. Oh, sweetie, that's a good one, Linda said, wiping a tear from her eye. Sure she is, and I'm the Queen of England. They didn't believe him. The idea that an 8-year-old black boy could have a mother powerful enough to run an airline empire was, to them, a laughable fantasy. Sit over there, Patterson ordered, pointing to a corner. And don't even think about getting on that plane until we clear this. Marcus walked to the chair with his head held high, pulled a college-level textbook on quantum physics from his bag, and began to read. Excellence, his mother had always said, speaks louder than ignorance. For 15 agonizing minutes, the gate agents made calls, their eyes repeatedly flicking over to Marcus, who sat engrossed in his book. The other passengers stared, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and blame. This is ridiculous, one woman said aloud. Just remove the child so the rest of us can board. Finally, Patterson approached him. All right, kid, your ticket checks out, you can board, but we'll be watching you. He said it as if he were granting a favor. Marcus closed his book and walked down the jetway alone. He knew the fight wasn't over. He knew it was probably going to get worse on the plane. But he walked on anyway, because Marcus Jennings didn't quit. When he boarded, flight attendant Kelly Morrison spotted him instantly. Excuse me, she called out, her voice dripping with disdain. What are you doing up here? Marcus stopped at his row. Going to my seat, ma'am. 2A. Kelly stormed over, snatching the boarding pass from his hand. This can't be right. Coach is in the back. I know where Coach is, Marcus replied calmly. My seat is here. A businessman in 1A, Richard Weber, looked up from his laptop. Is this kid seriously in first class? He scoffed. A woman in 3B, Patricia Donovan, clutched her designer handbag. This is ridiculous. I paid a fortune for peace and quiet, not to babysit. Everyone, I apologize for the disruption, Kelly announced theatrically before calling her supervisor Tom Bradley on the intercom. Tom, a heavy-set man who shared Kelly's cynical worldview, arrived within minutes. Seeing Marcus, he immediately assumed the worst. Son, you need to come with me, now. Why, sir? Marcus asked. I'm in my assigned seat. I've done nothing wrong. Tom's face flushed with anger. Don't make this difficult. Finally, Weber chimed in. Get this kid out of here. But not everyone agreed. Michael Park, a man in 4D, spoke up. He's just a kid with a ticket. Leave him alone. Mind your business, another passenger shot back. We don't want trouble. That's when Marcus stood up on his seat so he could meet Tom Bradley's eyes. His voice, steady and clear, silenced the entire cabin. My name is Marcus Jennings. I am 8 years old. I am flying to Seattle for a national science competition. My mother purchased this ticket legally. If you remove me without cause, that is discrimination, and my mother will sue this airline. The cabin went still. An 8-year-old had just schooled them on passenger rights. Did this child just threaten us? Kelly sputtered. That's it, Tom said, pulling out his radio. I'm calling the captain and airport police. Marcus sat back down and opened his book, his hands trembling slightly, though his face remained a mask of calm. The cabin erupted into arguments, some defending Marcus, most attacking him, with Kelly shouting over them all. This child is causing a disturbance, she insisted, though Marcus was the only one sitting in quiet composure. Airport police soon boarded. Officer Davis, a black man in his 40s with kind, experienced eyes, and his partner, Officer Thompson. Kelly immediately launched into a dramatic retelling. Officers, this child forced his way on here, threatened staff, and has been aggressive and disruptive. Weber and Donovan quickly corroborated her story, adding their own embellishments about his hostile attitude and obvious fraud. Officer Davis looked from the ring of angry adults to the small boy at the center of the storm. He had seen this scene play out too many times before. He walked over and knelt down to Marcus's level. Son, he said gently, can you show me your boarding pass and your ID? Marcus calmly handed over his entire folder, his ticket, his school ID, his competition invitation, and all his travel authorizations. Everything was organized in a folder, as if he had prepared for this very moment. Davis examined each document with meticulous care while Officer Thompson questioned the flight attendant, Kelly. What specific threatening language did he use? Thompson asked, his tone neutral. Kelly fumbled, her composure cracking. He said his mother would sue us. Thompson raised a single skeptical eyebrow. After you attempted to remove him from a seat he legally purchased? Davis stood, placing the folder on an empty seat. Everything here is legitimate. This child's ticket is valid, purchased 2 weeks ago through the proper channels. All of his documentation is in perfect order. Tom Bradley, the flight supervisor, protested, his face flushed with indignation. But he's 8 years old. Children don't fly first class alone. That's suspicious. Davis's voice was firm, cutting through the supervisor's bluster. Actually, unaccompanied minors are permitted to fly first class with the correct documentation, which he has. There is no violation here. Marcus finally spoke, his voice so steady until now, cracking with the weight of emotion. Officers, I've been polite. I haven't raised my voice once. I showed them my documents multiple times, but they keep accusing me of stealing and lying. Why are they treating me this way? A passenger named Rodriguez stood up, holding his phone aloft. I've been recording this entire interaction. This child has done nothing wrong. What you're witnessing is harassment. Another passenger, Park, joined in, his voice ringing with conviction. This is racial profiling, plain and simple, and we are all witnesses to it. A man named Miller shot back with a sneer. Oh, please, everything's about race with you people. An older woman, Henderson, added with a sniff. In my day, children knew their place. Officer Davis turned his attention back to Kelly and Tom. This passenger has violated no laws or airline regulations. He will remain in his seat. This matter is now closed. Kelly's face contorted with a mask of rage. I have the right to refuse service if I feel unsafe. Davis stared at her, incredulous. You feel unsafe? From an 8-year-old with a physics textbook? Tom played his trump card, his chest puffed out. We're calling the captain. This is our aircraft, and we have final authority. A moment later, Captain Richard Sullivan emerged from the cockpit. A white man in his 50s with 3 decades of flying experience, he radiated an air of calm authority. Tom immediately launched into a litany of falsehoods. Captain, this child has been aggressive with staff and passengers, refusing to cooperate. We need him removed from the aircraft. Sullivan's gaze fell upon the scene. Tiny, 8-year-old Marcus, surrounded by a ring of angry white adults. He saw the police officers, their expressions weary. He saw the other passengers, their phones raised, recording. "Son," he began, his voice intended to be soothing, "have you been causing problems?" Marcus looked the captain straight in the eye, his small frame radiating a dignity that shamed the adults around him. "No, sir. I've been sitting in my seat, reading my book, waiting to go to Seattle. These people don't think I belong in first class because of the way I look." Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. "That's a very serious accusation, son." Marcus's voice was unwavering. "It's the truth, sir, and my mother is going to be very upset when she hears about this." A passenger named Weber actually laughed out loud. "Oh, Mommy's going to be upset! I'm so scared!" A ripple of mocking laughter followed from several others. Sullivan turned to Kelly. "If the boy has been quiet and non-threatening, we need to proceed with boarding." But Kelly wasn't finished. "Captain," she declared, her voice ringing with false authority, "per Regulation 3-7B, I am officially declaring that I feel unsafe with this passenger on board." Suddenly, the jetway door banged open with a force that made everyone jump. Every head swiveled toward the sound, and into the cabin strode Victoria Jennings Rothschild, a force of nature in human form. Kelly was still talking, pleading her case about the perceived threat of an 8-year-old. Tom stood nearby, his arms crossed, a smug look of victory on his face. Captain Sullivan was rubbing his temples, trying to calculate the most diplomatic path forward. The smirking passengers settled back in their seats, assured that their worldview had been validated. None of them noticed who had just arrived. None of them knew their world was about to be dismantled. The click of her Louboutin heels on the cabin floor echoed in the tense silence, a countdown to judgment. Click, click, click. She was tall, stunningly beautiful, wearing a $5,000 Armani power suit that likely cost more than Kelly's entire wardrobe. Her very presence radiated an authority that made everyone instinctively sit up straighter. Behind her, a procession followed. 3 corporate lawyers in sharp suits, the airport director practically jogging to keep up, and 2 airline executives whose faces were pale with terror. She walked past Kelly without a glance, past Tom, past the captain. She went directly to her son. "Marcus, baby, are you all right?" Her voice, when she spoke to him, was transformed. It was soft, a balm of love and concern that cracked through her iron composure. At the sound of her voice, Marcus's brave facade finally crumbled. The 8-year-old, who had endured an hour of humiliation with preternatural strength, jumped into his mother's arms and buried his face in her shoulder. "Mommy," he sobbed, "they wouldn't believe me. I told them who you were, and they laughed at me." Victoria held him tight, stroking his hair, her embrace a fortress of safety. Then she slowly turned to face the cabin. Her expression could have frozen hell over. Her eyes swept across every face in first class, the passengers who had mocked him, the employees who had terrorized him, the captain who had failed to protect him. When she spoke, her voice was ice cold, sharp enough to cut steel. "My name is Dr. Victoria Jennings Rothschild. I am the founder, owner, and CEO of Skybridge Airlines. This airline, Continental Wing, is one of my wholly owned subsidiaries, and that brilliant, brave child you have been tormenting for the past hour is my son." Absolute silence descended upon the cabin. You could have heard a pin drop. The color drained from every detractor's face. Kelly's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Tom Bradley seemed to shrink, pressing himself against the wall as if he could melt into it. Captain Sullivan's eyes went wide with a dawning, abject horror. Victoria let the silence hang, letting the weight of her words crush them. "Someone explain to me," she continued, her voice dropping to a dangerously low pitch, "and choose your words very carefully, why my 8-year-old son, with a valid ticket and complete documentation, was accused of theft, detained, surrounded by police, and threatened with removal from a seat I personally purchased for him." No one spoke. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. "No volunteers?" she said, a chilling smile touching her lips. "Then I'll tell you why. Because you saw a small black child and your minds defaulted to a single racist assumption, that he didn't belong. You could not conceive of a world where a black woman could be successful enough to afford a first-class ticket for her son. Your prejudice is so profound, You would rather humiliate a child than question your own bigotry. Just then, James Patterson, the gate agent, stepped onto the aircraft, summoned by airport security. He had walked directly into his own execution. Victoria's head snapped toward him, her focus as precise as a sniper locking onto a target. Patterson James, employee ID 4782. Her voice was clinical, devoid of emotion, which was somehow more terrifying. You detained my son for 30 minutes on suspicion of ticket theft without ever verifying his identity through proper channels. You never called the unaccompanied minor coordinator. You simply assumed a black child in first class must be a criminal. You're fired. Security will escort you from the airport immediately. Patterson's face went white. Miss Rothschild, please, I have a family. Victoria cut him off without a flicker of remorse. My son is my family. Did you think of him when you humiliated him? Escort him out. Two security guards took Patterson by the arms. His pleas echoed down the jetway until they faded into nothing. Next, she turned to Linda Cooper, the other gate agent who was shaking so violently she looked as if she might collapse. Linda Cooper, employee ID 3291. You laughed when my son told you I was a CEO. You told other passengers he was a security risk. You are also fired. Collect your things. Cooper was escorted away in tears, her career evaporating in less than a minute. Victoria then stepped fully into the first-class cabin, her gaze sweeping over the passengers who had tormented Marcus. She stopped at seat 1A. Mr. Weber, Richard Weber, Platinum Elite member. You've flown with us 47 times this year, your words were. Is this kid seriously in first class? Your lifetime status with Skybridge Airlines and all its subsidiaries is revoked, effective immediately. You will be rebooked in economy on a later flight. Gather your things. Weber's shock curdled into outrage. You can't do this. I'm a paying customer. Victoria's smile was glacial. I can, and I just did. I don't want racists representing my brand as elite members. Leave now. Security removed him as he bellowed about lawyers and lawsuits, his voice fading down the jetway. She moved to seat 3B. Miss Donovan, you said you didn't feel safe with my child on board. I had my team pull your passenger file. You have 3 prior complaints against you for discriminatory behavior, all against minorities. This is a pattern. You are banned from all Skybridge Airlines for life. Security will escort you off the aircraft. Donovan shrieked as she was led away. This is discrimination against me. Victoria's voice was calm. No, this is a consequence. There is a difference. Remove her. She paused at Margaret Henderson in 6A, the woman who claimed Marcus was too articulate. Mrs. Henderson, you have lived through the civil rights movement. You should know better. But clearly you don't. You are banned for life. Leave. The woman clutched her chest dramatically, but she was removed all the same. Then it was Stephen Miller in 5A, the man who mocked the idea of racism. Mr. Miller, you said everything's about race with you people. Let me educate you. When you witness a child being racially profiled, and your only response is to mock those defending him, you are not a neutral observer. You are complicit. You're banned for life. Get out. Miller was dragged off, still sputtering about free speech and cancel culture as the jetway door closed behind him. Victoria addressed the remaining passengers. Does anyone else wish to explain why an 8-year-old with valid documents deserved this treatment? The cabin was deathly silent. Then she turned to Tom Bradley. He had tried to become invisible, but there was nowhere to hide. Supervisor Tom Bradley, she said, her voice surgical. You escalated this at every turn. You lied to the captain. My team pulled your file. You have 4 prior complaints of racial bias that were conveniently buried by your regional director. That director, by the way, has also been fired. As are you. I will personally see to it that you never work in aviation again. Bradley's desperation was palpable. Please, Miss Rothschild, I have 18 years with this company. A mortgage. Her voice was merciless. And you used those 18 years to make people of color feel unwelcome. Leave. Finally, Victoria turned to Kelly Morrison. The entire cabin seemed to lean forward. This was the main event. Victoria walked slowly toward her, and Kelly backed away with each step until she was pinned against the galley wall. Victoria stopped inches from her face. Kelly Morrison, she whispered, her voice low and deadly. You are special. You're not just fired. I am pressing criminal charges. Harassment of a minor, false imprisonment, because yes, illegally detaining someone without cause is imprisonment, and filing a false report with law enforcement. My legal team will sue you personally. I will ensure you never work in a position of authority again. You saw my baby, and you chose to torture him. That ends today. Kelly was sobbing now, mascara streaking down her face. I was just doing my job. I thought, your job, Victoria cut in, is customer service. You terrorized a child. I saw the videos. You smiled when he was afraid. You are not just unemployed, Kelly. You will be held accountable in a court of law. Remove her and take her directly to airport police for processing. Kelly was placed in handcuffs and led off the plane, her cries echoing until the door sealed her fate. At last, Victoria turned to Captain Sullivan. He was sweating profusely, his collar soaked. Captain, she said, her tone shifting slightly, you are in a different category. You arrived late, but you failed to de-escalate. You questioned my son instead of your crew. You are suspended for 30 days, pending a full investigation. You will attend mandatory, intensive bias training. If you show genuine change, you may return to duty. If not, you are finished. Understood? Shaken to his core, Sullivan nodded. Yes, ma'am. I apologize. To you and to Marcus. Sincerely. Victoria's voice was firm. Tell him. Not me. Captain Sullivan walked to Marcus and knelt, his own eyes wet with tears. Marcus, I am so sorry. I should have protected you. And I failed. It will never happen again. And Marcus, with the incredible grace of a child who had been through hell, looked at the captain and said, Thank you, Captain. I accept your apology. The first-class cabin sat in stunned silence. Half the seats were now empty. Victoria Jennings Rothschild stood in the middle of it all, holding her son's hand, having delivered the most devastating and absolute display of justice anyone on that plane had ever witnessed. But she wasn't finished. Punishing the guilty was only half the equation. Honoring the heroes was just as important. She turned to Carlos Rodriguez in seat 2B, her voice now warm. Mr. Rodriguez, you defended my son when it was easier to stay silent. You recorded evidence that will be crucial. Thank you. Your next 10 flights with any Skybridge airline are complimentary, first class. She handed him a business card. And that is my personal number. If you ever need anything, you call me directly. Rodriguez was overwhelmed. I just did what was right. Your son is an amazing kid. Not everyone did what was right, Victoria said, squeezing his shoulder. You did. That matters. She offered the same to Michael Park, who had also spoken up. He shook her hand, saying, I have children. I would want someone to speak up for them. Next, she addressed the police officers. Officer Davis, Officer Thompson, you acted professionally and saw through the lies. I'm writing commendations to your chief. Thank you for protecting my baby. Davis smiled, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. Ma'am, your son handled himself with more dignity than most adults I deal with. You've raised an incredible young man. For the first time since she'd stepped onto the plane, Victoria smiled, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, she whispered, I have. Finally, she turned to the remaining passengers, those who weren't hateful enough to be banned, but not brave enough to intervene. Her voice was firm, but free of malice. The rest of you stayed silent. You watched a child be humiliated, and you did nothing. You are not punished, but you are complicit, and you will have to live with that. I hope the next time you witness an injustice, you remember this day, and you choose to speak. A woman in her 40s stood up, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, she choked out. I was scared to say anything. I'm so sorry. Victoria simply nodded, her gaze softening slightly, before she turned her full attention back to the small hand held firmly in her own. The revolution was over. Justice had been served. I didn't want to cause any trouble. I'm such a coward. Victoria regarded the woman with an expression that softened into something like compassion. Then be braver next time, she said, her voice gentle but firm. That is how we change the world, one brave moment at a time. The woman sank back into her seat, tears still tracing paths down her cheeks, but she nodded in understanding. At last, Victoria settled into seat 2A beside Marcus. She took his small hand in hers, and they began to speak, their voices a quiet murmur, a private current in the charged atmosphere of the cabin. "My love, I am so incredibly proud of you," she whispered. "You were so brave. Did they frighten you?" Marcus leaned into the comfort of his mother's shoulder. "A little, Mommy. But I remembered what you taught me, that I have as much right to be here as anyone. I didn't do anything wrong." Victoria wrapped her arm around him, pulling him closer. "That's exactly right, baby. You never, ever have to make yourself smaller for people who cannot handle your greatness. You are brilliant. You are worthy. You belong everywhere you have earned the right to be. And you have earned everything." Marcus was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. Then he asked the question that shattered his mother's heart into 1,000 pieces. "Mommy, why do people hate us?" Victoria's own tears fell freely now, and she made no effort to hide them. "Because, my sweet boy," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "some people are taught to fear what they don't understand, and they never learn to question what they were taught. But that is their problem to fix, not yours. You just keep being magnificent." He nodded against her shoulder, processing a truth that no 8-year-old should ever have to comprehend. The plane finally took off. 2 hours delayed. But the mood in first class was transformed. The passengers who had fueled the hate were gone. The employees who had enabled it were fired. What remained was a cabin full of people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Some were steeped in shame. Others felt a spark of inspiration. But all of them were changed. Throughout the flight, passengers approached them. Carlos Rodriguez came over, his phone in hand, and showed Marcus photos of his own children. "This is my son, Diego. He's 10. He wants to be a scientist too. I'm going to tell him all about you. You're his hero now." Marcus smiled, a hint of shyness in his eyes. "I'm not a hero. I just like science." Rodriguez laughed warmly. "That's exactly what a hero would say." Next came Michael Park, holding a thick paperback. "Marcus," he said, "I bought this at the airport bookstore. It's about advanced robotics. I was going to read it, but I have a feeling you'll get more out of it than I will. A little something for the journey. Keep changing the world, buddy." Marcus took the book with a reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. "Thank you, Mr. Park. I'll read it and tell you what I think." Even the woman who had apologized earlier approached, holding a small bag of cookies from her carry-on. "Marcus, honey," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I am so sorry I didn't speak up sooner. You deserved better from all of us. I promise I will do better next time." She offered him the cookies. "My grandmother's recipe. I baked them for my trip." Marcus accepted them with a grace and kindness that belied his 8 years. "Thank you, ma'am. I forgive you. And these look delicious." Each gesture was small, a single drop in an ocean of hurt. But together, they showed Marcus something vital. That for every person who hates without reason, there are others who are willing to care. For every Kelly Morrison, there is a Carlos Rodriguez. For every Tom Bradley, an Officer Davis. And sometimes, in the face of injustice, ordinary people find their courage and become the heroes they were always meant to be. If you find yourself moved by this story of justice and redemption, I encourage you to subscribe, because the conclusion is one you won't want to miss. But first, a question to consider. Victoria said the silent passengers were complicit, even if they didn't actively participate. Do you agree? Is silence in the face of injustice a form of participation? It's a profound debate, and I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. For the remainder of the flight, Victoria sat beside her son, holding his hand, occasionally stroking his hair, a silent, constant reassurance that he was safe, loved, and protected. Eventually, exhausted from the trauma of the day, Marcus fell asleep on her shoulder. Victoria gazed down at his peaceful face and made a silent vow. This would never happen to him again. She would make sure of it. Not just for Marcus, but for every child who looked like him. Every child who had to be twice as good, twice as brave, twice as dignified, just to be treated as if they belonged. The revolution had begun, and Victoria Jennings Rothschild was just getting warmed up. The plane landed in Seattle, and Victoria escorted Marcus to the competition venue. It was a massive hall, humming with the energy of 200 of the nation's brightest young minds. Marcus was the youngest competitor by 2 years, but he was unintimidated. He had already survived something far more terrifying than a science competition. When his turn came, he walked onto the stage and presented his solar-powered water purification system with a confidence and passion that left the judges speechless. These were professors from Stanford and MIT, people who had seen thousands of projects, and they were utterly blown away. One judge leaned into his microphone. "Young man, how old did you say you are?" Marcus stood tall. "I'm 8, sir. I'll be 9 next month." The judge shook his head in disbelief. "This is graduate-level engineering. How did you design it?" Marcus smiled. "I read a lot, and my mommy always says that if something you need doesn't exist, you should invent it. Clean water doesn't exist for everyone, so I invented a way to make it." The judges deliberated for less than 10 minutes. Marcus won first place, and with it, a $100,000 research grant. The auditorium erupted. The standing ovation thundered on for 5 full minutes. In the front row, Victoria wept with pride, watching her son shine with the brilliance he was always meant to share. Marcus held the gleaming trophy above his head and shouted into the microphone, his voice ringing with conviction. "This is for every kid who was ever told they don't belong. We belong everywhere." The crowd roared even louder. In that moment, every child in that room who had ever been doubted, dismissed, or told they weren't good enough, they all heard him. And they believed. 2 weeks later, Victoria stood at a podium in the headquarters of Skybridge Airlines. The room was a chaotic sea of journalists, a storm of flashing cameras and outstretched microphones. "2 weeks ago," she began, her voice cutting through the noise, "my 8-year-old son was racially profiled, detained, and terrorized by employees of my own airline. This is unacceptable. As a result, I am implementing sweeping changes across all Skybridge Airlines and their subsidiaries." She laid out her plan with chilling precision. Mandatory quarterly bias training for every employee. A zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, where a first offense meant immediate termination. An independent oversight committee with community representation. A passenger bill of rights, to be displayed prominently at every gate. A $10 million donation to organizations fighting discrimination in travel, and finally, the Marcus Jennings Scholarship Fund, providing full-ride scholarships for 100 minority students in STEM fields every single year. Her voice was steel. "My son's experience was not unique. It happens every day to Black and brown travelers. That ends now, not just at my airlines but across this industry. We are setting a new standard, and I challenge every other airline in America to meet it, or be left behind." A reporter raised his hand. "Ms. Rothschild, some might say firing all those people was too harsh." Victoria didn't hesitate. "And do you think terrorizing an 8-year-old child was too harsh?" "No? Then we're done here." Another journalist tried. "What do you say to those who call this cancel culture?" Victoria's response was ice cold. "I call it consequences. For far too long, people have faced no consequences for their racism. That era is over." 6 months later, the world was different. Marcus was on the cover of Time for Kids beneath the headline, "The 8-year-old Changing the World." His water purification system was being implemented in 15 countries, with UNICEF partnering to deploy units in refugee camps. He was invited to speak at the United Nations. Kelly Morrison's court case ended with a guilty verdict, community service, and mandatory diversity education. Tom Bradley and James Patterson found themselves unemployable in the aviation industry, both working minimum wage jobs. The passengers who had been banned from the airline tried to sue Victoria. They lost every case. But one of them, a man named Stephen Miller, did something unexpected. He wrote a public letter of apology that went viral. "I was wrong," it read. "I was raised with biases I never questioned. Watching that 8-year-old boy handle my cruelty with such grace taught me more than a lifetime of ignorance ever could. I am doing the work to change. It is never too late." Captain Sullivan completed his bias training, apologized publicly, and became a fierce advocate for industry-wide reform. Carlos Rodriguez and Michael Park became close family friends, attending Marcus's 9th birthday party with their own families. And Skybridge Airlines? Discrimination complaints dropped to nearly zero. Employee satisfaction soared by 40% now that the toxic elements were gone, and the airline's revenue increased by 30%. as diverse travelers finally felt safe and welcome flying with them. At age 9, Marcus gave a TED Talk titled, "Why 8-Year-Olds Deserve Respect Too." It garnered over 50 million views. In it, he said something that shook adults to their core. Adults think kids don't understand racism. We do. We feel it every single day. When you cross the street because a black kid is walking toward you, when you follow us in stores, when you assume we stole something we paid for, we see you, and we remember. So when you tell us to be the change you want to see in the world, remember this: we're watching you too. Be the adults we deserve. 2 years after that fateful flight, Marcus was 10. He boarded another Skybridge flight with Victoria. As they walked down the aisle, the entire first-class cabin recognized him and erupted in applause. The flight attendant, a young black man named Isaiah, greeted them with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Jennings, Ms. Rothschild, it is an honor. Marcus, your story is the reason I applied to work here. This airline changed because of you. Thank you." Marcus, as humble as ever, just smiled. "Thank you for making everyone feel welcome. That's all that matters." They sat in seats 2A and 2B, the very same seats. Victoria took his hand. "Do you remember how scared you were that day?" Marcus looked at his mother, his eyes wise beyond his years. "I remember how brave I decided to be, Mommy. You taught me that." Victoria's own eyes welled with tears. "No, baby," she whispered. "You taught yourself. I just gave you permission to shine." The plane took off smoothly. Marcus gazed out the window at the endless expanse of clouds below. "Mommy," he said, "when I grow up, I'm going to make sure no kid ever has to feel the way I felt that day." Victoria kissed his forehead. "My love, you're already doing it. You're only 10, and you have already changed the world. Just imagine what you'll do next." Marcus smiled, then pulled a folded blueprint from his backpack. He was designing a solar-powered airplane. Because that's what Marcus did. He saw problems, and he solved them. He saw injustice, and he fought it. He saw a world that tried to make him small, and he simply made himself impossible to ignore. If this story moved you, I hope you'll subscribe, because stories like this need to be told, shared, and remembered. Kelly Morrison thought she had power because she wore a uniform. Tom Bradley thought he had power because he had seniority. The passengers on that plane thought they had power because they had money. But real power? Real power belonged to an 8-year-old boy who refused to believe he didn't belong. It belonged to a mother who used her influence to create justice, not just profit. It belonged to the everyday people who chose to speak up when silence would have been so much easier. Marcus Jennings didn't just win a science competition. He didn't just change an airline. He changed the entire conversation about who deserves respect, who deserves dignity, and who gets to decide who belongs where. And he did it all at 8 years old, with grace, courage, and a belief in himself that no amount of hatred could ever break. That is the real story. That is the revolution. And it all started with one child who simply refused to give up his seat.